Antinatalism is the most astute, sensible, reasonable, liberal, freedom-loving, benevolent, and common-sense defiant ethical philosophy there is. And it's actually a quite obvious and simple truism ethical proposition. 1. Life is entailed with inevitable suffering. 1.1 Aging is inevitable suffering. 1.2 Sickness is inevitable suffering. 1.3 Death is inevitable suffering. 2. Therefore, procreation produces inevitable suffering. 3. A minimalist ethical system demands that we ought not to produce unjustified and unnecessary harm upon others. 4. Therefore, procreation is immoral. It's a shame that most of humanity can't see how obvious antinatalism is, because most people don't really like to spend their time with introspection and reflecting about life's inconvenient truths. Hence, most people end up having their best judgment clouded by their own selfish desires and passions. And they don't realize that the best thing they can do for the well-being of their own children is precisely not having them. The argument presented highlights the antinatalist view as a perceptive, sensible, and reasonable ethical philosophy grounded in logical analysis of the realities of human existence. It emphasizes the inevitability of suffering in life, stemming from aging, illness, and death, and concludes that procreation results in inevitable suffering for future human beings. Additionally, the argument appeals to a minimalist ethical system which advocates for the avoidance of unjustified and unnecessary harm upon others. From this, it is inferred that procreation is immoral. However, the author expresses frustration with the lack of widespread acceptance of antinatalism, attributing this to most people's reluctance to reflect on life's inconvenient truths. They suggest that many are influenced by selfish desires and passions to the detriment of clear and impartial reasoning. While the argument is articulated clearly and logically, critics may contest some of its premises, such as the inevitability of suffering or the intrinsic immorality of procreation. Additionally, it's important to acknowledge that the discussion on the ethics of procreation is complex and involves a variety of perspectives and personal values. Certainly, let's analyze the argument presented in the text. 1. Main premise. The main premise of the argument is that life is intrinsically associated with inevitable suffering, including aging, illness, and death. This forms the basis of the antinatalist reasoning, suggesting that human existence is permeated by painful experiences. 2. Logical conclusion. The logical conclusion derived from this premise is that procreation results in the creation of more suffering, as new human beings will inevitably face the same afflictions as those who already exist. The argumentation follows a linear logic, directly connecting existence to the experience of suffering. 3. Minimalist ethics. The argument invokes a minimalist ethical principle, arguing that we should avoid causing unjustified and unnecessary harm to others. In this context, procreation is considered immoral because it introduces a new being into a state of inevitable suffering. 4. Critique of lack of reflection. An additional critique is directed at society in general for not recognizing or accepting antinatalism, attributing this to people's reluctance to confront inconvenient truths about life. This suggests that lack of introspection and reflection clouds people's judgment on the subject. Overall, the argument is logically structured and grounded in a particular interpretation of the human condition and ethical principles. It seeks to challenge conventional perceptions about procreation and raises questions about moral responsibility and consideration for the well-being of future individuals.